I have to understand how to work with communities, and because of what's happening in the world, I also need to understand development. So I work on behalf of many organizations down south. If you want to know more, you can ask me, but basically I develop and manage projects of Israeli, Palestinian, Jordanian cooperation in many, many fields according to the community's wishes and needs that I work with from the Dead Sea down south, starting also in Sinai. And the point of this panel today is this is going to be our actually opportunity to meet. So we're going to hear from our panelists as an example. I'm sure a lot of you could be sitting here too. And we're going to try and make our questions and answers quite brief so we can have time for a meaningful discussion. We heard a lot of deep and intense presentations here, starting with Alon and continuing. So in order to take an opportunity, everything we do is about an opportunity, in my belief, to engage and meet. So we have a short time to do it, but that's the aspiration for this time. Okay, so if we're going to hear the questions, each panelist will introduce themselves, and we have 3 prepared questions, and then it will be an open conversation. Okay, that's the plan. Cool. So we are very honored and happy to have here Dr. Shoshan Haran, her daughter. This is horrible. Can you hear me without it? Yes. Yes, no? No? Okay. So I'll also say that Dr. Shoshan Haran's daughter, Shaked, is also an Arava alumni, so it's another exciting cooperation point. And Dr. Shoshan's outstanding career is in the seed and agriculture industry, and it spans over more than 3 decades. She's a leading agronomist, economic expert, and a Fulbright scholar. Dr. Haran managed large-scale international projects for leading seed companies, initiated and led multinational research and development collaborations, and managed intellectual property portfolios. Dr. Haran has vast experience as a board member of national and multinational companies. Next to Dr. Shoshan Haran, we have Hagit Floyd, who is the deputy, a lot of you know her. She's the deputy director of the Peers Program for Global Innovation, and she'll tell you exactly what she does. But prior to working in the Peers Program, she spent several years living and working in East Africa for an Israeli company, where she led operations and developed multi-sector long-term partnerships that propelled wide-scale HIV prevention initiatives in Rwanda, Kenya, and Tanzania. And we have Peter Uladi from Zimbabwe, an environmental historian, development practitioner in the making. Peter has published a paper on threats to flood security in colonial Zimbabwe with reference to locust attacks. He is expecting other 2 papers this year, one on development inequality and the second on state-sponsored agriculture and its effects on Zimbabwe. So the first question is for you to, beyond my brief introduction, to say who you are, what you do, and mainly what is your motivation to do what you do.
So, as you said, I'm a seed person. I worked many years for seed companies, the companies who breed varieties for farmers. And I understood that seeds are the basis for the food supply in the world, because almost everything we eat is originating from plants, also the ones we eat meat. The chicken or the beef are eating also plants that are bred by seed companies. So seeds are the basis for the food supply in the world, but they don't reach the developing countries where the farmers cannot produce the food because they don't have access to high quality seeds. So I decided to leave the private sector, and I founded Fair Planet with a mission to bridge the gap between the best seeds in the world and the poorest farmers. And that's what I do in Ethiopia for the last 7 years, and I can tell you more about it. We increased the yield 5 times more just by providing access to suitable seeds, professional seeds, and guidance how to improve the productivity with minimal changes to the local farming practices. So I can tell you more about it later.
So
as you mentioned, I work for the Peace Forum for Global Innovation. And what we do is we work with the private sector here in Israel and try and increase the private sector contribution to international development. More specifically, we work with the innovation ecosystem. Israel has this amazing innovation ecosystem, yet if you look at how much of our innovation is actually exported or targeting or answering developing countries' needs, you'll see that there's quite a big gap, and we're trying to narrow this gap in some extent.
Thanks, Rina. So my name is Peter Oledi. I'm an environmental historian. So my background is more in academics, but because of also my background, I grew up on a farm, seeing how the environment was used for development of communities. But there was this darker side of development, scientific development, advanced development, these big words, to the environment in which other communities were looking for livelihoods or also depending on them. And it has always been my focus, like in my bachelor's and my other masters and also in this Glocal Masters, to try to understand and also bridge the gap between what academics do and what practitioners on the ground do in terms of environmental management and also environmental sustainability. So, yeah.
So next question is, what does environmental development mean for you? Like, what are the key success standards that you would say this is a good practice of environmental development?
First of all, I want to mention that Glocal are doing our evaluation, so you can ask Glocal about how they evaluate the program. I'm a farmer. I'm from Kibbutz Be'eri, by the way. I just came from the war zone trying to reach this place. I'm a farmer, and I know that farmers produce food and they want to increase the yield and the income. And we all mentioned bridging the gap, so seed the gap. And we measure our success by the productivity, the income, the profit, and the livelihood of the people that we provide access to seeds. As I said before, we do it with minimal changes to their farming practices, mainly because of sustainability. Seeds, the power of seeds is that they have all the traits inside the seed. Seed companies invest a lot of efforts and scientific knowledge to develop better seeds, but once the farmer gets the seed itself, he just needs to know how to grow it, to give it water and support. So it's the most important one single input for a farmer to increase his or her productivity and income.
You asked about what's environment for us, but myself, I'm not an environment specialist. I don't work specifically in this field, but I think what I've came to learn from working in agri-field is that you would want to mainstream environmental thinking into other aspects. My past job was in a HMB project, but there are so many environmental aspects and things to consider in terms of the materials being used and how are they being over time, waste management and reusable. I think in every field there are environmental issues to take into account, and so from my perspective, it's mainstreaming environmental thinking into other projects and other fields as well, and taking it into account.
Well, for me, I think environmental development is a system in which there is congruency, there is harmony, consonance, there is this nexus between development and environment, the two forces, combined, where a society can use the environment for development, and also development in turn improves the environment. We can talk about the use of water bodies, we can talk about the use of forest, we can talk about soil itself, how is it used for development, and how is development feeding back to the soil for sustainability. So for me, this nexus between the two And you also asked about what are the standards of success. For me, I think it is justice in environmental matters, where what we do does not harm the environment, but fits into the environment. And also there is participation between different stakeholders. You talk about the indigenous communities, you talk about the government, you talk about the civil organizations. So if there is that relationship, I think for me that's a success, because there is a gap between what practitioners do and what the indigenous people know, what the government wants and what other stakeholders want. So, and what is now being affected is the environment, so it bears the brunt of all these policies and actions. So,
This is if you can elaborate a little bit more about your favorite method, strategies, so beyond also what has been done, like the how, what's from your practice has been a good practice, but you could also recommend other practitioners, of how do you gain this precious, almost impossible balance that you just mentioned.
If you can speak closer to the microphone and a bit louder. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Yeah, because they can't hear you.
Okay. Is it better?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
What we found out that really works is extension, working with the farmers in their own fields, going out to their farms. There are many projects that focus on, in agriculture at least, focus on like a training center and demonstration farm, which we have. We have 4 training centers in Ethiopia. But what really works is that when we go out to the smallholder farmers and train them on their own fields and teach them and show them that they can do so much better just by going out to them. It requires a lot of efforts. We work with many volunteers because we need to reach the farmers, and sometimes you drive 40 minutes to get to a smallholder with 1/10 of a hectare. But we found out that this is the most effective way to bring change. And we trained already 1,200 lead farmers in Ethiopia in about 200 villages. And the diffusion of the impact is very quick because the farmers see what the neighbors does and then they copy and they implement. So we reached already 50,000 smallholder farmers in Ethiopia that dramatically increased their yields and income.
The community I work with is Israeli entrepreneurs, so it's a really different community to interact and work with. I think I'll say that what I mentioned about mainstreaming and reminding environmental consideration, especially when designing products, their durability, the type of materials that are being used, the disposal of those materials over time is definitely something to consider. But looking at from this perspective, I would say that there's also the other kind of side of the coin that your aim would be to develop a certain project or a certain product and reach a certain target. And sometimes we're too drawn, maybe it would not sound right to this audience, but I'll give the example of what we do right now. We have a program that develops products in the field of water, sanitation, and hygiene for humanitarian settings. And so we work with people sitting here in Israel and trying to develop products for humanitarian emergencies. And we've integrated environmental thinking and looking at environmental considerations from a very early stage. So right now, many of them are saying that they don't want to do anything which is related to plastic. So they look very much at, the type of packaging that they would use. And we sit here in Tel Aviv, we're using plastic cups here, and sometimes we need to kind of fight back and say, hey, remember the cause that you are trying to promote. Not to put aside the environment, but if you need to bring good drinking water to people in the field, then not necessarily this should be your first consideration. But on the other hand, we see a lot of times in humanitarian crisis that this is the last thing to think about. So I would hope for a certain mainstreaming and balance.
Well, for me, I think collaboration. And when I mean collaboration, I'll talk about it within the context of, within the African context. And in this, within the context of African indigenous knowledge systems. So as an academic, I've been interested really to understand what happens with the indigenous knowledge systems. And I studied extensively the Kenyan example. What fascinated me the most was a book written by Mary Tiffany, More People, Less Erosion. How can that happen? More people, less erosion. And that's what Professor Alan was talking about. More people, more erosion. But she was talking about more people, less erosion. So the model here that was adopted by Kenya was we should tap into the indigenous knowledge because this is a model that has been tested, tried and tested over centuries and passed over generations. So for me, I think there is need for collaboration between government and to tap into what the indigenous knowledge people know. I can give you an example of the best conserved forest, maybe in Africa, but they say in East Africa, is the Mount Forest. And the model they are using is the African indigenous knowledge system. The government realized that they were losing the forest, they were losing wildlife at a very alarming rate. So there was collaboration between the government and the indigenous people on how best they can regenerate. And today it's said to be a success in the whole of Africa. I can talk about other examples in Niger, in Namibia, but I think this one stands as one of the best. Yeah.
So last question on our side, and then it's going to be open. If you can think about one little, either an advice or a mistake, something that you think that could benefit colleagues here in this room about this field, something that you've done wrong and learned from it, or any kind of advice for people who want to work towards this goal of environmental development?
Well, that's very challenging. I think the most important thing that I see when working with local communities that are very different from ours is be humble and respect the person or the people in front of you. The fact that we are coming from a more advanced economic society doesn't mean that we are better or wiser than them. Just respect the person you are talking to, respect the culture. The culture is very different. We work in Ethiopia and the notion of time, being on time is very different. One of our first volunteers said, we have a watch, but they have time. They do have time. And it's very challenging when you have a big event and you ask people to come at 9 o'clock and they show up at 10:30 and then at 11. But respect, it's a different culture, and just look at the other person and respect.
Hannah mentioned before coming back from Rwanda, and I spent 2.5 years living in Rwanda, and I think when I living in Rwanda, you're very aware of waste because you literally pay people to take waste out of your house, and I mean, just generally it's a country with much more environmental awareness than Israel, and then you come back and there's a cultural shock of how much waste are we producing here. And I think that just, again, maybe I'm repeating myself a bit, but in every project and in every aspect, you always do trainings, you always have handouts, water bottles. So I think everywhere you go in development and whatever you do, environmental issues will be there, waste will be there, consideration to take into account in terms of your environment will be there, and so it's important noticing them.
For me, I think it's consultation. Consult. The next person knows more than you know. And also, there are other people with knowledge that is so useful but not documented. I'll go back also to the example that I was using of African Indigenous knowledge system. It's only that governments and policymakers do not fancy consulting on these, practices, but where they consulted, the result was positive.
So thank you very much for those parts. And we're opening now to hear any questions to the panelists. It could be about either something they said or anything before. And just say your name and where you're from, like which. I don't know if you need the mic or you can just speak loud or
Hi.
we have one hand.
So, thank you everybody for having us here. My name is Anana. I'm a designer and a researcher in the sustainable fashion field. And my question is for the seed Shoshani, right? But also for all of you if you have answers. So I know about the the cotton seed situation in India, and about the like suicide of the farmers and so on. Now I know that the cotton and the fashion industry is moving to Africa, a lot of it to Ethiopia or to Kenya or other countries. So I was wondering, what do you know about it? What do you think about it?
Well, I am assuming you're talking about GMO cotton. So luckily, without going into the technology and what I think about the technology, our project is vegetables. There's no GMO in vegetables, so it's not relevant for our project. We give the freedom for the farmers to choose which varieties they want to grow. When we do the testing, we always include local varieties and invite the farmers to see the performance and the economic potential, and they decide what they want to grow. We just train them how to improve their farming practices. So it's a big discussion, but it's not related, at least, to the project that we are leading.
You can just pass it to the next person.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So the question is, looking at what Alon showed earlier, thinking about specifically China, and look at their development path, which was very centralized. I'm wondering, how do you see this nexus between small farmer or community development or centralized planning? Do we sometimes romanticize too much with this idea of communities and small farmers? And maybe sometimes we kind of push back the transitioning that needs to happen from small farming to larger farming, or from small communities towards more developed urban areas.
Okay, so what you have asked is also what I'm writing about in one of my papers, where you talk about central planning and its effects. So the government knows it all. They have a path of development, and they want good things for everyone. But sometimes the top-down approach is the one that is affecting mostly these communities, because the communities sometimes know more, but what they need is an empowerment platform in which they can let out what they have and also use new technologies. And in this paper I talk about the effects of the government, where the government talks about how they want certain agricultural programs to be conducted, how they want certain environments and forests to be preserved. And there is now a clash between what the indigenous people in these communities know and how they have done it over time. And this has been done like for 5 years now, and the results were so negative that there's more food insecurity within these same communities that the government is coming up with policies. So I think it goes back to the point that I talked about earlier, that there's need for consultation and collaboration to create this relationship between the government and different stakeholders. I don't know if I answered you.
And if anyone else from all of us wants to answer a question, then feel free. Well, just raise your hand if you want to answer. Yes. Okay, any answers?
No, I have a
And that's
question.
next question. Okay, so Gadi has the mic, and then.
Hear me? My question is kind of long. I'm not sure how to phrase it. So there is an application I know that can help farmers in many developing countries for the small farmers. And it's for diagnosing diseases and advices on how to treat them. Kind of replacing agronomists. Sounds great, but big companies want access to this application, the fertilizers companies, the pest companies, in order to know what the hundreds of millions of small farmers are doing to sell them more, to sell them better even. But this would connect more indigenous people, Peter, you mentioned the indigeneity, to the digital world. So there is a lot of incentive to connect them also to the farmers themselves. But my question is about the cultural or the well-being or the psychological influences of this rapid development. I've learned about it years ago. I'm wondering about your experience and your knowledge about what's happening, at least in Africa these days, with so much development going that it increases, the life expectancy, all kinds of very nice things on paper. But my question is, what's your perspective on what it does to people's lives, well-being, dignity, when so much information and ideas come from the outside? Boom, we know here's how you do things, and we really mean to be good with you, but you know what I mean, changes that it does.
Quite a hard question before you say
Interesting question. A bit complicated to answer, but I'll try. Well, I think that first of all, not all new technologies that are coming and transforming, you mentioned Africa, but the developing world in general, not all of them are coming from outside. A lot of the innovation that we're seeing and the successful innovation are actually things that are coming from inside. I think the best example that is known is the issue of the use of mobile money. Okay, cellular companies came from outside, the machine came from outside, but actually the first mobile wallet was developed in Kenya by a Kenyan company, trying to answer a Kenyan need, which now grew across the continent and also internationally, and we are behind their leapfrogging and passing on to a new technology. So, and I think generally this is true about adoption of technology. If a technology is not good and it's not answering a need, then it would most probably not be adopted. And I think in this sense, people in developing countries are customers of technologies just like we are here. And I think the issue you mentioned of big agencies selling our data is also true about our data and what Google or Facebook know about who I am right now and what I'm doing. So it's not a unique problem to the developing world. It's definitely a problem. But if a farmer would choose to use a certain platform, it would only be because it brings a certain value to this farmer. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. So it's a problematic give and take. But I think when you mention new technologies coming up, then they would be adopted if there is a need. So and not forced away in. I think that private market initiative in that sense are very different from development projects. That's my take on that.
So I will answer not from a point of marketing, but from a point of documenting certain activities. So just a little bit of an example. When I was growing up in the rural areas with my grandmother and my grandfather, they would tell you that this year we don't need to plant a lot of crops because I think the rains are going to be a little less. I once shared about this, and I was like, okay, so how does she know that we're going to receive less rains this year? But there's a certain way that these people know, like they feel the winds, they see certain things. So what the government has done in my country is to try and now document these, exactly, and also try to influence and inform decisions on what can, in terms of climate change, in terms of sustainable farming. I can also give you an example of, I remember this vividly, I don't know why. She will also tell you that not this year we're going to have a certain type of a worm So I think we need to increase our spacing in terms of corn when you like planting corn, and it will happen. So there's more to these things, and if that can be known and documented and sent to other farmers, I think it can also improve farming. But the pace at which it's happening is very slow. But indigenous communities and other communities are not immune to change, especially technological change.
Hi, my name is Eliane, and my question goes to Hagit. Do you think there's a possibility to have a comprehensive approach of the environment when you do humanitarian aid? For instance, I was in Peru with a wash mission, and we were installing filters for potable water in villages and schools. And I know that in several villages, like, they were just dropping them and not using them. So I wonder if it's possible to have a humanitarian aid mission that you already know that it's going to be short term without doing harm.
I'm not a humanitarian specialist, so it will be hard to answer. But I think the question is always who's accountable and for what. And you can see that when a government, like what often happens in humanitarian setting is that there's a mess, there's a crisis, and the government is not very strong in terms of saying what goes in, what goes out, who goes in, who goes out, and then you can many times do whatever you want and choose your own priority. And when a place is more stable or more centralized, you'll always have people who would be accountable for certain issues. You know, something would be thrown away, somebody would pick it up and throw it to the garbage. Trying to build on your example. So I think that in order to make humanitarian missions more environmental friendly, the accountability should go to whoever's facilitating those humanitarian missions. And so it's an issue of organizations taking responsibility for these issues as well, and not putting them aside and saying, hey, I'm here to provide life-saving aid, and whatever I leave behind when I leave, that's not my problem, because my mission is, just one design. So the question is, what are you accountable for, and what's the bigger picture that you're seeing? And in the case of humanitarians who need to step in. I think what I've seen in different countries in Africa is when there's more environmental awareness, where the government is more aware, and then the government is pushing whoever's operating in this country to take those things into account. When the government is weak or doesn't prioritize environmental issues, then there's no accountability for that.
Yes, I would like to know what you think about this. Hello? If you have any comments about this, there seems to be a divergence in what the goal of development is on different scales. For example, when you talk about the state and development, for them is increasing crop yield and increasing the GDP, for example. So maybe you want to impose more